All right. Happy Tuesday, everybody. And we're back with another special episode of Learning Tech Talks, where we are continually exploring the landscape of learning tech while cutting through the fluff. Today, I'm joined by Vineet Taneja, and he's from Microsoft. And we are going to be talking about all sorts of crazy stuff, whether it's virtual collaboration. We're talking about the new learning app. I don't know. We've got a long agenda of things. So hopefully we get through it with the time that we have. But if you're just joining us live as we're getting started, go ahead, give us a thumbs up, share the post, tag in somebody who would benefit from our conversation while we're getting started. And while you're at it, comment in and join us or tell us where you're joining from. Sorry, I'm a little out of it today. Tell us where you're joining from. I am in Waukesha, Wisconsin, western suburb of Milwaukee, as always. Vineet, where are you today?
Hi, Christopher. I am in Redmond, in the greater Seattle area.
Okay. And it looks like you were at home. Either that or that is a really comfy office.
It is my home. It is my man cave.
Okay, got it. So I have to ask, is there a desk that you're sitting at, or do you just kind of like hang out in like a comfy area?
I'm totally a desk person. Like I have a desk
person.
Yep.
Okay. So the man cave has a desk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I like it. So I would say the same thing. I'm totally a desk person, right? I have my office. I don't know that mine's really a man cave because I'm not as cool. I don't have a TV in mine or anything like that. But yeah, I'm an office person for that. All right. So before we get going here, before we start talking about Microsoft Teams, we've got our icebreaker question. This is a tough one. So you've had a little bit of time to think about it. I had some time to get ready for it. Everybody watching, you can play along too. But Vineet, if you could only have 3 apps, 3 on your phone, what would they be?
Wow. Okay. Microsoft Teams.
Okay, good answer.
I don't think I can survive without that. Pretty much everything happens, especially for work, on that right now. WhatsApp.
Okay.
To be in touch with family here, friends. So it's pretty much all of that is on WhatsApp. And I'm a news junkie and a little bit of a stock market watcher. So I like to see what's going on in the market in my stock. So whether a news app which also gives me that, or an app that actually I built a few years back, which I actually use.
Of course you did, right? The app I like is the app I made.
Yeah. So those 3 would be my must-have ones.
Okay. All right. So I struggled with this one too. Mine, I'm actually cheating a little bit with one of mine. My first one is Google Chrome. Because if I have Google Chrome, I can get to a lot of things. So it's kind of like cheating, I guess.
Yeah.
The other one is text messaging, right? Similar to WhatsApp. Like if I couldn't communicate, that would be rough.
Yeah.
And then my last one would be LinkedIn. If I use LinkedIn all the time. So those are mine. We've got somebody else. See, somebody's pretty close to you. I'm guessing this is Boss, either that or Kareen. But LinkedIn, WhatsApp, New York Times. We've got some other news folks here as well. Shannon's all about the weather. Shannon is all about the weather. Okay, I don't know. I just look out the window. That's how I roll. It's just like I don't know. What are we doing here?
That's
okay.
Right.
Okay, so now we've got that. We figured out what apps are your most critical apps. But let's dig into this because today we're talking about Microsoft Teams, but really some of this recent news that just came out about the new learning app and what that is. But before we get into the learning component, we're going to talk a little bit about what we talked about before we came live about what does this mean for Microsoft in the learning tech space and all this good stuff. But for people who may not be super familiar with Microsoft Teams itself, how do you explain to people what Microsoft Teams is?
Great. It's actually fairly simple, at least now, to explain what Microsoft Teams is. But even if I go back 3 years back when we had just launched and this phenomena was picking up, and when you say phenomena, the phenomena of getting work done using chat, people were just doing it, right? We just saw people talked about which applications are your must-have, and most people are talking about some kind of texting application. Why?
Okay.
Because work is happening on chat. Whether we like it or not, it is just our habit. We are doing that. So Whether it is about sharing files, sending images, hey, please get this done, tasking, all of that is happening on chat. So work is already happening there, but most of the consumer applications are not compliant, secure,
Okay.
and it is not the right thing for the enterprise. So when the enterprise looks at it, many a times the CIOs, they freak out like, oh, yes, I know they are doing work on these applications, but my data is leaking out. Or, I cannot do e-discovery or a legal hold if tomorrow something wrong happens. Those are important for the enterprise. So can you marry the two? And the third aspect is it is not only about text. You need to bring other things together if collaboration needs to happen more seamlessly. Files are important in any collaboration. Other applications are important in collaboration. Can we bring these together? And that's the thought we had 4 years back when we were building Microsoft Teams, and we were able to do that in a way which was natural for users to say, "Oh yeah, we work in a team of 20, and here are the files that matter to us." I just go to the Files tab and I put it there. At the back end, it is SharePoint. They didn't have to go to SharePoint to do this. It just happened for them. That is how a user should work, and that's how they roll. If we bring the right experiences and services to them, then they will use it, right? So that is what started happening. Of course, with that, the meetings aspect, we already had Skype for Business, where a lot of meetings, online meetings were happening, and the stack on which we were building was the same stack. So bringing the chat-based collaboration and meetings and call together, that's where the magic happened.
Okay.
Right? So that's what Teams is for your collaboration with your peers, where you work, where you chat, where you meet each other.
Got it. You know, what's funny about that, and you talking about this journey that you've been on, is that every once in a while I hear people say, oh, this is new behavior, right? This is a new trend that's coming up. And I'm like, this has been happening for a long time. I mean, years and years and years, people have been collaborating this way. But to your point, they were just doing it through whatever tool they had or whatever tool they were familiar with. And so they were really kind of going out, coloring outside the lines a bit in terms of figuring it out. We just didn't have visibility into it in many cases. We just kind of said, oh, well, they aren't doing this, but they were, right?
In fact, as a product person, one of my favorite thoughts actually is, Christopher, that users hack their way into meeting their needs. If you are a smart product person and if you observe them on how they are doing it, that's how most of the great products are actually born, right? Of course, there is innovation where you say, hey, throw something out totally new. That also happens. But more often than not, it is more about, oh, user is doing it this way. We didn't give him the tool for that or her the tool for that, but they hacked it into this. There's something there. You go down and build it and give it to them, test, iterate. That's how good products are built. And that's I've seen that succeed multiple years of my experience.
Well, it's funny. My early days, I worked for a medical software company, right? And I was on the implementation side, and we would implement these big healthcare systems. And I remember working with the product teams a lot. And part of the reason I worked so closely with them was because they were always asking, what is the end user actually doing? Because that's what they cared about, because they're like, well, we designed the UX this way. Are they using it? No, actually they have a complete workaround because this is a nightmare for them. And so they do this other stuff. And then they would evolve the system to meet that need, instead of saying, well, there were times, and it didn't go very well, where they said, well, what we want people to do is this instead. So we're just going to force the system to do it. People just find ways around it. I mean, they literally just find ways around it.
User habits, right? Do not go against the grain of user habits. And if you're don't do a step function. You do a step function, you will have a rejection, right? The body will reject it. The user will reject it. There is a way, as we say, that, boil the water so that the frog does not know. If you do it slowly, and this happens in branding and marketing, right? You make a step function change, there will many a times be a jerk reaction from users or audiences. But if you do it slowly, you change the background color, they will not notice it. At the same time, oh wow, this is now new and I still like it and I love it. Product is no different in my mind.
Yeah, it's an important message to people in the learning community too, right? Because there's this huge pressure to go, we need to do digital transformation for learning and development. And if you're still doing it one way and you're thinking, oh, we're just going to completely flip the script and go over here, like you said, right? Frog jumps out of the boiling water faster than its feet even touch the water. It's just boom, they're out, because that's not the way you change human behavior.
Exactly. And that's why call them Trojan horses, right? Tools that they are already using, that they have come to love. If they are doing work in that, in terms of enterprises, and if you bring other experiences which blend naturally in that experience, much higher chance of users adopting it and then using it.
Okay. And that's a big part of what we're going to end up talking about here, is the fact that the goal of this is to bring learning right to where the work is actually happening, where people are doing it. So instead of trying to push them somewhere that they're not familiar with or create new user behavior that's unfamiliar or uncomfortable, we're saying, hey, this is what you're already doing. Let's take that step move and make it easy. Okay. Absolutely. The question, though, that I want to ask, that I get a lot, when people were getting ready for the show, comes from the ed tech side of the house, because now Microsoft, right, is moving into the learning technology space. I mean, you've been there for a while with LinkedIn Learning and things like that, but the learning app announcement was a pretty big, announcement for the community. What does that mean? Is Microsoft coming out? They're going to take over. They're going to create the panacea of learning tech. I know the answer to this because you shared it with me, but right, that's the fear setting in. People are like, oh my gosh, is Microsoft going to come out with every learning tech app that already exists and swallow up the market?
Because a very, very interesting question and a very important one. I would like to say, in Microsoft of the new age, which we are now, we really, really value our partner ecosystem a lot. Hence, anything that we do on the product and technology side, it is very important that partner adoption and working with partners is a big part of the story. So I will just lay it out there. This is so important for us. In terms of how we are doing with teams, not only with learning, I will give an example. But the concept to first talk about is system of engagement and system of record. System of record are these, let's take different examples: ERP systems, CRM systems, learning technology systems,
LMS
management systems, right? There have been between 20 to 30 to 40 years of investment by different ISVs, on where they are in the industry in terms of capabilities that go into these systems. There is a reason that companies pay millions of dollars to deploy these systems in their own premises or in the cloud. At the same time, these systems are important, but many a times they are also used by experts or power users inside the organizations. For the 70 to 80% of mass employees, for them to get and start using these systems or portions of it, that is where we see some friction. I'll give an example. In my earlier gig, I was working on the frontline space. So frontline workers, the cashiers in retail, or the shift workers in a manufacturing facility. If we take one need they have across industries, is shift scheduling. Hey, I gotta know where am I going to
scheduling, you said?
Yeah, shift scheduling.
Yeah. Yep.
So hey, which store am I going to be on Monday? What time does the shift start? What time does the shift end? Because these folks get paid pretty much every week, and that's how their life is. Some folks are doing shifts across companies because to make ends meet, and that's the need. Shift scheduling, if you see, there are workforce management systems which do shift scheduling, large ones and deployed in large companies. Based on our research and what we saw on the ground with customers, they mostly would stop at a supervisor persona. Let's take, for example, in a store manager is a supervisor. They would work in these workforce management tools, do the scheduling, then hit print and put the schedule out on the board. Yeah. So if I were a frontline worker, I would go and say, oh, okay, Monday, 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. is my time. What happens if I want to do a swap? I have to go back to the store or call up the store manager, takes up my time and the store manager's time. The tools would not go to where the frontline worker was. With Teams, we started seeing, frontline workers using Teams because these are sanctioned, enterprise sanctioned chat applications.
Yep.
They're just, having chat with their peers and just, again, sharing images and say, hey, please clean up this aisle on
You
this
don't have
one.
to worry about getting in trouble with IT.
Exactly, right? Now, in that same application, Teams, we added shift scheduling as an application.
Okay.
Now, suddenly, the workforce management systems had reach they never had. And we built APIs. We built APIs with shift scheduling, which works and integrates with these workforce management systems. We did not displace them. We got them users which were not getting to them because it was stuck on paper, and digital tools stop at when the print is hit. So now Microsoft was winning because we were getting these users which were never in the digital fold. The workforce management system actually had more number of users and transactions because nobody was asking for a time off earlier from automated, sitting in their home saying that, hey, tomorrow I can't come and I'm calling in sick. Manager gets it, approves it in 5 seconds instead of somebody calling in, finding the swap person, etc.
Yeah.
So that's an example of system of engagement, multiplying the engagement for the system of record.
Yeah. Well, it's a really good, I think that's a perfect layout for how this stuff works too. And I think the part about it is, to your point of the system of record there, right? In the scheduling tool, they're not going to invest in the UX the same way that Microsoft would with Teams, because for them to do it, that end user is not real, the behavior is not going to drive for them to go there enough to actually drive the investment on their part to really build that out the way it is. So it's designed to be, like you said, for the administration, for the manager. It's not really designed for the end user, but rather than them do it, it's a partnership with you to say, well, we're the one they're already using. Let's tie the two together.
Bingo. And that is exactly what happened. They were like, so we have multiple ways to integrate. And they were like, I want this mobile interface. This is important to me. And we didn't build that mobile interface like yesterday. We have taken a big team 3 years to build the mobile apps that we have. So the kind of investment we've made is for that engagement. And we are not making the same kind of investment in creating all the depth of the business rules for the workforce management. So the same playbook we will bring to learning.
Okay. Got it. That's helpful to flesh that out, right? Because I think it is an important, and I think the other piece that's important that you highlighted there, that if you haven't been in software, I don't know that you can really understand the complexity that goes into, to your point of designing the mobile app, right? The user experience of the mobile app. You've had teams dedicated just to designing that. Mm-hmm. It's very easy if you're not familiar with things to go, well, just make the app do this, or you should just have the app work like this. That's not something that you just snap your fingers and do. The research behind that and making that is an investment on your part, correct?
Absolutely. The research behind that, seeing where the user is actually engaging, we have that data, and powered with this data and empowered with this data is what the experience we'll be putting in the learning app. You'll see it later today in our conversation. Absolutely right, because that takes a lot of research. It's easy to think this is a set of UI, but the kind of research goes in each pixel, the color of the pixel, the position, and all that. That's the investment that gets us then the return and makes it possible. So that is one. And other is this insight about, hey, you got to have APIs because you are not an island.
Yes.
Very important for us, right? Because there is a whole partner ecosystem that should integrate with this. Only then will this be sticky and will there be a win-win.
Okay. And that's what we talked about just before we went live, is this whole, I've seen it over the years where organizations try and create the panacea, right? It's the one app that solves it all. It does everything that you could ever want it to do. And you end up with something that does a lot of things sort of well, maybe, but nothing super well. And so it doesn't necessarily actually solve a lot of problems. In fact, it kind of creates a lot because you end up with poor user experience. You end up with customer complaints. You end up with user adoption issues. I mean, it just blows up all over the place when you try and do everything really well.
Absolutely. And that's why every application, service, what have you, whether it's enterprise or in the consumer space, needs to know what they are best at and provide value from that perspective and not try to be this, we'll do everything, because you will not be able to do well. It doesn't happen.
And that's coming from Microsoft, right? I mean, that's right. That's coming from Microsoft, who probably could do a relatively good job of doing things pretty well. And even you're saying like, it just doesn't make sense. And I think that's what I still get a lot of questions from people sometimes. We're like, what do you mean with this whole ecosystem concept? And that's what we're talking about right now, is how do we actually thread and pull the different applications and tools that people are using and that we need on the back end for systems of record? How do we thread all those together to create the best experience for everybody, not just the end user? Because again, I've seen apps where they index way too far on the end user, and they skip all the administrate, right? They kind of ignore the stuff, and that blows up. Then it doesn't work. The end user loves it, but the people actually who bought it don't.
Absolutely. In fact, so two things. One is all the personas that are important, end user wise, the learner and the learning admin, and then the IT admin. If the IT admin says, "Thou shall not have this application," that's it. You will not. If they are not convinced about the compliance and security aspects of it, if they say this cannot be audited, that's it. The enterprise will not have that, right? So those personas, their tools are equally important.
Yeah. And that's an important thing for people. And again, I speak to the learning community a fair amount. And it's one of those things where a lot of folks in the L&D community don't come from a technical background. And so they may not necessarily understand all this stuff. And it's why sometimes you get the IT eye rolls when you come back from, DevLearn or whatever, and you're so excited about XYZ app that you bumped into, and your IT team says, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? And we're not prepared to answer those questions sometimes.
And that is super important, as you said. For adoption, the first hurdle, of course, if it's a digital tool, is CIO's office. They need to be convinced that this is the right thing. It will not go against all the promises that we have around compliance, security, privacy, all of that. If that is done, then the business shall have access to it. When it comes to business should not be struggling. It should not be yet another tech tool for them to figure out. It should be easy for them to figure out. How do you do that? How do you not get lost in multiple bells and whistles on who to give what access to, etc.? So we will see some of that also on I will use the word especially with the learning apps, social, more democratic, so that the business user and the actual engagement does actually happen.
Yeah. Well, and that was one of the things, right? Because if the CISO and the CIO slam the gavel and say, no way, that's it. It doesn't matter how much the learner might want it or like it. And I've seen this go south before, where L&D goes rogue, right? They're like, we're just going to do it anyway. And it doesn't go well. Let's just say that. It's about kind of bringing the whole picture together.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, the alignment needs to happen for the goals across the enterprise, right? Or otherwise, somewhere or the other, it will hit a hurdle.
Yeah, it will, and I've seen it more times than I can count. So yes, I can certainly attest to that, and I'm sure you've seen it on your end as well, which is what we're getting at with Teams, right? Teams is already in most enterprise ecosystems. You're not going to run into that. Now, granted, to be fair, you still have to, any of the apps that you're looking at integrating into it will still have to go through that same process. So, it's not a free get out of jail card just because you have Teams that now you can hook up whatever you want to it. Correct.
Now, on our side, we have a whole process called enterprise readiness planning before an app is put out, even for preview.
Okay.
Right? If we are not meeting those tenets, we can't even go out to a single customer or a user at a customer. Because we ultimately, once the app is out there, we want to make the admins and then the business's life easy to say, okay, you check all the points that I need, as Teams was today. Just by adding another application, I'm not going into a tailspin of 3 more weeks or 3 more months to say, is this compliant? Does it meet this? No. If it is live, which means it has already met those.
That's a helpful clarification. So by the time an app is actually authorized and approved in Teams, you at Microsoft have done a pretty extensive vetting, right? Because it's now public, correct?
Yep. Absolutely. Okay. And we start that pretty early in the product development process, which we are right now. right? We start that very early so that we are checking those boxes as we go. Otherwise, the cost of it doing it in retrospect is very high.
Well, that's a huge risk on you as well, right? You put an app out, turns out there's huge vulnerabilities to it. Nobody's going to come back and say, that's not a good position to be in.
Absolutely. So whether there are policies for us to meet, what policies are existing in the admin center of teams, using the same set of policies, the way you manage 3 apps, the 4th app should also be able to manage through that, so that there is no learning curve even for the IT admin. That's super important for us.
Okay. So keeping some consistency, again, reducing the friction on all this stuff that a lot of times can be loaded with lots of hurdles and hiccups. Okay, right. So let's transition this, right? Because one of the big things is, right, that one of these apps we're talking about, we've now painted the picture of what is Teams, right? How is it solving problems by bringing things together, by reducing the IT security risks, doing all this stuff. And now last month, the Learning app comes out, right? Big press all over the place. What is the Learning app for Microsoft Teams?
Sure. So let me, talk about a little bit context on
why we are building. Give us some context to it first.
And I'll go back to my favorite thought, as I said, about, hey, we actually saw users hacking Teams to meet learning needs, right? As I was doing Teams mobile about 2 years back, and we saw at particular retailers 30,000 users using Android phones in their stores. Like, what's going on here? We went and did some interviews with them, and we found out the store ops team in the morning, at least twice a week, would send out 5-minute videos. Video could be how to fold a shirt, right? This was a garment retailer, and they would send it out on a channel called Store Managers. There would be about 1,500 store managers in the channel. By noon, they will send an Excel sheet with all the names in one column saying, have you completed and seen this 5-minute video? Third, who in your store has also seen this video? So they were essentially getting learning done, but without using a formal tool, but sending content and reporting. That's pretty much what it was. Right? That's one example. Second, even before COVID happened, some of our customers had started moving trainings from face-to-face to more virtual.
Yeah. That didn't start because of COVID, for sure.
But definitely, exploded with COVID. But they had already started seeing, I can save cost. I don't have to either fly the instructor somewhere and pay for the hotel cost and the airline cost, etc. Or sometimes it is you're flying the audience or the attendees over. All of that is cost. And if you look at the overall L&D spend, a big part of that is this. It is less about digital tools. A lot of is being spent here. So they were already like, what, with these tools, we can possibly save our cost and meet either 100% of our goals or more in some sense. So what did they do? Let's take this particular example, manager excellence as a training for new managers. 10 or 12 people would come together, one instructor. They would form a team for them. In the journal channel of the team, they would put in the files folder, they would put all the content that would be used over the next 3 weeks. So this is not a 60-minute training. This is something that will go over a few weeks. So there will be video sessions.
Yeah, they're creating a cohort, right? Kind of almost a learning. And are they creating? They were creating a specific team or a channel just for that?
So they would create the team. So the cohort would be the team. There would be specific channels for breakout. So if there are 12 people, and because in Teams, every channel can just do an instant meetup. And there could be multiple meetups going on in parallel, concurrently. So you can have 3 breakout teams, sub-teams, and 4 people each doing breakouts.
And that's why they did, and again, I'm kind of helping demystify, right, how they're structuring this. So they're structuring it because each channel, you could basically create a breakout room so people in that channel could jump together and actually do a quick huddle or problem solve type thing while still remaining in the team.
Exactly. In the general channel, they would say, hey, 12 people, a breakout room 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And now channels will be called breakout room 1, breakout room 3. You go there. It starts at 11 a.m. Okay, you go there. and then you start this concurrent meet. Everybody is seeing each other, talking about whatever discussion, etc., creating a PowerPoint deck about, hey, what did we learn, come back into general, and then present that. So all of this is, and they were getting it done using Teams, and what we now actually formally call inside the group is cohort learning. So they were getting cohort learning done. And the other aspect which was very beneficial for the customer was not only getting these folks together for the 3 weeks, they stay there as a cohort. They intermingle with each other, right? They share best practices, and so that becomes a networking opportunity, and hence the probability of what they learn and are they actually applying it. Do they have questions to each other, maybe even to the instructor who's part of the cohort? That just naturally happens. Versus what happens in live is you go there, yes, you meet, maybe you spend 3 weeks, and then the group gets disbanded, and the probability of getting them back is lesser. Versus this tool is naturally built that way.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about that, right? So Yammer's been around for quite a while, but back when Yammer first came out, I did some cohort learning using Yammer, but the challenge with it was some of the things you described were still difficult because you couldn't do a meetup in Yammer. You could kind of keep an asynchronous discussion going, but again, it was outside the flow of where people were normally doing things. So we could do it. We could bring people in a cohort and kind of keep some thoughtful discussions going there, but it became very hard to keep it sustainable because once that kind of moment of we're doing something right now left, people were back to work. I mean, they were just back to work in a different tool versus Teams. It's all right there where people are going in and out all the time. So plus you can do all the other things like meetups, share files, all this other stuff.
Absolutely right. So those two observations led, hey, there is something here that we should do and bring in terms of more natural features that our customers could use and give it a name, give it the admin properties that are important for really learning departments, not only learning department, and no offense to the community here, to the managers and supervisors and people themselves to learn. Peer learning is very, very important for us to enable, right? So those were our insights and takeaways from that customer research, and then we started painting the picture of what this could look like. What we announced a couple of weeks back is, I would say, a part of it. So the learning app in Teams, which talks about bringing learning content in the flow of work and giving managers, supervisors, and peers the tool to assign, recommend, share training with each other and track it, is just the beginning. As M365, we have much more in store, which we will bring over the months and quarters. The learning app will be the start.
So this is just the starting line. This isn't the finish line for what you're doing with things. Okay. Well, no, and that's extremely helpful to one, kind of understand the backstory and context behind, what is this? How does this all fit together? And that there's more to it, because I think, again, what I've seen so far and what I know about it, it is a good starting point. But again, there's a lot more that can be done to go. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about what it is today then, right? Like, what is the learning app today from a capability standpoint?
Yeah, we could do that. Christopher, could we bring up some of the slides?
Yes, you're supposed to use your super secret hand gesture, Vineet. You're not supposed to say, okay, there we go, thumbs up. And remember, the point means next slide. Okay.
So, let me walk us through what learning app in Microsoft Teams would be with, help of few scenarios that hopefully will resonate with the audience. So, social learning, we will be pivoting a lot on this. And when we say pivoting, I'm using it from a learning perspective. But if we see what's happening out there with our customers and the users in the enterprise, Teams is fast becoming, or has become in many of them, the enterprise social networking tool. Right? That's where you find your peers, chat with them, share stuff. That's, and bring your files and applications, etc. together. So we want to inject capability to discover or even curate your own learning content in the same scaffolding. So the example here you see is in a Teams channel where you have conversations. So post is conversation, files where you keep your files. You should be able to add what is called as a learning tab. So each of these on the top onboarding channel are tabs. So you click on plus and you should be able to say, hey, learning, and I'm adding a tab. Anyone in this team can do that. So it's let's say a team of 20. It's not manager who can add a tab.
So it's not something that has to be, I mean, it has to be added by your enterprise, but once it's there, anybody can add it to their team.
Exactly right. So anybody can add it to their team, rename it. If you call it our trainings here, you can call it Cloud Hat 101, depending on what your team is about. Or you say onboarding trainings, anything. You can rename that. And the catalog using which you will pin these trainings here is your company's catalog, right? So we will bring a few things there. By default, we will have LinkedIn Learning turned on and Microsoft Learn, which is our technology training asset that we have. It will be prepackaged here. It's free for everyone. LinkedIn Learning, of course, if you have the premium license for LinkedIn Learning as a user, you will be able to watch all the LinkedIn Learning courses. We will start with definitely a set which will be available for everyone. So that for you to see, hey, okay, these are the kind of trainings that are definitely available. Beyond that, we will also integrate with third-party content providers. Very important for us because we don't own all the content. We are not in the content business. We are in the getting the learning content in the flow of work business, right? So the third-party content providers, in fact, they would get a bigger surface area to reach users in the same enterprises that possibly have their subscription already, but get hindered because the learning tools are not in the flow of work, and this is what we seek to do there. The fourth constituency of content is customers' own content. A lot of customers create their own content.
Yeah, there's especially around product, around process, things like that you can't buy off the shelf.
Now, there are two, based on our research, there are two stores, if you will, where this content is kept. If you have a learning management system, then many a times that content is kept in the LMS. And there is a constituency of customers who have not yet invested in LMS. The content is lying in network drives, and they're like, hey, what do I do with this? Since we are M365, we have SharePoint as the natural storage. So if you want to hook up with LMS, that's another constituency of partners in the ecosystem that we will be integrating with. But if you say, no, I don't have an LMS, but I still like this experience, where can I keep my content? SharePoint. Most natural place. The way you can do files today, you should be able to, using SharePoint, be able to do what we call as learning objects. And that becomes your tenant catalog, and all of this searching and discovering happens over it. And the users or the employees in that team should be able to curate it. This is what matters to us, and that's why we are curating in whichever channel they would like. So that's the first example of social learning.
Okay, so two follow-up questions on that I think, because some of the questions are coming back that I think I'll be able to answer all of them as I follow up on this. So one, you're adding the tab at the top to kind of say, okay, and you call it whatever it is, team trainings, our training, like whatever, to go along with it. That content in that tab that's being curated from different places, is that all coming into the same tab? So let's say in a use case, you have LinkedIn Learning, you have some internal content sitting somewhere else, things like that. That's then being curated onto one page. You don't have like our trainings, LinkedIn Learning, our trainings, LMS, our trainings, SharePoint. It's the one page of like, hey, this is the relevant learning content for this team.
Correct. And in fact, as I said, the repository of training content for the tenant, as we call it, or for the customer, is the tenant catalog. That catalog will have what the admin has chosen. They may turn to say, hey, we don't want LinkedIn Learning for whatever reason. Okay. But they would like it because it's so rich. So LinkedIn Learning, your own content, third-party content becomes your repository of, let's say, 20,000 learning objects. That is for Contoso Corporation, their catalog.
Okay.
When a user is searching, the user says, let's say, manager training or Azure fundamentals. 4 or 5 trainings will come up and you will choose these 2 are fine, pin. Those get pinned. So you're choosing from the catalog of 20,000 to pin the 6 to 8 or 800 in that tab.
So, and I think this will again help clarify this for some of the people that are asking some questions, because I'm seeing about like, can it host SCORM content? Can it be validated? These things, those are not the questions to be asking, because ultimately that's happening at the admin level in the background, where somebody's saying, hey, we need to create our catalog of what are the resources that we administratively approve are available to literally anybody, managers, employees, whatever. What is that? And that's all being hooked up there on the backside. The end user is not going to see all that. They're not going to see the complexity behind bringing that together. What they're going to see is they're going to see, hey, there's this new art learning app, and I can search a catalog and I can search for whatever. And that is then the portal at which that administrator is channeling all that. And then you can see this list of stuff. So you wouldn't be hosting things in there. You'd be hosting them on the typical places you normally host content, your LMS, your SharePoint, things like that, that you would be putting all that content still there. And then it would be getting approved through the admin on the backside to be added to the catalog that then becomes available to everybody, which then answers the question of, right, could the tool be validated for compliance training? Well, absolutely, because the compliance training would be sitting in your validated system that would then be hooked up to this catalog that then would be available to everybody. Same thing with imported content. Could it import SCORM content? No, because you'd be importing the SCORM content on whatever hosting system of record you have that would then be connected to this Teams catalog that is then available to everyone. Is that a fair summary?
Absolutely right. Because to put one more layer of how are these tiles coming up, the catalog that I talked about essentially has metadata about all these different content sources your company had access to. We built a catalog out of that. Using that metadata, these tiles will show up for the users. The moment you click on it, you see on that the dialog, you say open in Teams or open in browser. Many a times, let's say even third-party content providers, they were like, hey, don't eat away my user. Goes back to your ecosystem question. I'm not taking your user away. Let's say this one of the content from here was coming from a third-party provider. The user was able to search pin in the tab here. When the consumption happens, they click on that. It opens in the browser in the third party, which you already have access to as an employee, plays there. So some of the, let's say, the complexities of how that content is handled, how it's being streamed, etc., is already the third party is handling it. What they were struggling with, or what the company was struggling with, is how do I get in front of the user at the right moment and give them the power to curate it themselves and search it? That is the problem we are solving. System of engagement, not displacing the system of record.
Okay. And that goes to, again, some of the continued complexity. I think this is one of the things that can often be overlooked when we talk about, right, build your ecosystem, build your digital. There's a lot of complexity behind this. But again, not everybody has to feel that complexity. It's about, right, the super users or power users, I think you called them before. They need to know how to navigate that, because again, there are things that are going to matter. That third-party system of record, the way it creates a user interface of channeling that information, or what happens when people open it, that could potentially still be clunky, but that wouldn't necessarily be Teams, because Teams would be, it's simply channeling it to where people need to be. So you still need to be careful. Teams isn't necessarily the silver bullet to fix all the issues you have from a UX standpoint.
That's right. That's right. Now, in certain certain things that we can do better, which we own, like LinkedIn Learning, we can definitely do those. For others, because again, we have to be respectful of, we don't want to eat the experience or displace the partner. Very, very important for us. And yes, so Teams is not the silver bullet for all of it. The bigger one, definitely, in terms of getting in front of the user. So when we have the right signals, as we start, you see some of the signals, like users will be able to like a particular content. When they like this content, that signal goes back to M365, what we call as the graph. That will have an impact on when other users in the tenant are searching for trainings like this. All that layer will be available because of this tenant catalog. Again, then still working with our third-party systems.
Okay. So actually three. I've got a lot of follow-up questions. I told you we were going to run way out of time on this, but that's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
So my first one is this. On that end of things, right? So the data piece, because you're capturing a fair amount of data, which can tell a really powerful story, right? What are people doing? What are they engaging with? Things like that. From a data standpoint, how is that data then, how are you able to see that data or see what's going on with that? Because you're obviously still, that data is being pushed back to your record, your third party source, so that if a completion, things like that, that's happening there. But is there now a new data source that's telling you additional data about what's going on from a user experience that you can use to figure out, like, what are people really using, things like that?
Yes. So experience wise, and I would put data in two buckets. One is
Okay.
the completion data.
Yes.
So let's take an example of a training is in your dominant LMS at your company, right? Because even if you have put your own company created trainings in the LMS, there will be URLs for it. So again, metadata, we will bring this to the same experience. User clicks on it, goes to the LMS.
Yep.
Completion happens in the LMS. The system of record gets updated. Yep. We will have APIs on our end. So when Christopher goes to Teams Learning app, My Learning, and says completed trainings, it will give him the view of what was completed in the LMS and maybe something which was assigned even from the Teams Learning app, right? So that consolidation. So user experience is taken care of. At the same time, the sync with the LMS is also taken care of. That's how we're thinking about it.
Okay. So it's a two-way communication channel. It's pushing the data back, marking that stuff there, but at the same time in Teams, it's also keeping the data there so that end users can see what they did, managers can see what's going on, things as well.
Yeah. And then, of course, the engagement data, again, it's a thin line between when you work with third-party systems, how much of, you do the data sharing, the complexities of it, the APIs are different. What we will definitely start with is, hey, the engagement is happening in Teams. We will definitely have that data. We will definitely tell the customer. So there will be reporting capabilities from our learning tool, admin tools, where they will say, oh, in my company, these kind of trainings are being used more by source type, by even content type. So those are some of the early thoughts we have in terms of analytics and reporting.
Okay. And then the other, actually, the two quick, and we'll hit these quick because I want to get back to the actual tool itself. But so one is for user-generated content, right?
Mm-hmm.
So let's say people are generating content, or like we said, a lot of times, companies are generating their own content around their process, things like that.
Yeah.
Then is there how are people actually then getting that into the catalog? Are we saying, you need to have it in one of these back-end areas that is then approved for the catalog so that it shows up in the Teams catalog?
Perfect question. Whether I have it as part of my V1 or would be a fast follow, because as I said, we have to take care of the compliance aspects, especially as you open
user-generated content sets up a lot of red flags, a lot of places. I know.
We have to be careful, but I think we have the infrastructure and scaffolding. Now, take for example, in each channel of Teams, you have the files folder, which is essentially backed by SharePoint. So users are generating content today. They can be creating any Word document, any PDF, any file, and uploading there. Any content uploaded there goes to the processes and the policies of how any M365 system would comply to SharePoint and Teams. Being that, we plan to use that same scaffolding even for learning. The only difference will be where does a user upload the content from? I think more natural place will be the way the tab that we were looking at. I go to a tab and say, I think this content is important for my team. I hit on upload. I upload something, a 5-page PDF of how to do these steps better. Now that becomes part of, so from a user experience perspective for this set of team members, it should be no different. They should be able to search for it. They should be able to pin in tab, etc. From an access perspective, it should not go beyond the team boundary. Maybe it is only for that team. That's exactly where the compliance comes in.
Yes.
Today, we can do that for files. Any file, if you are not part of the team and if you've only kept it there, you share that link, you click on it, Christopher, it'll say you do not have access.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
So infrastructure exists for us. We plan to leverage the same infrastructure for employee-generated content when we have that feature. We are still looking at the engineering thing so that we bring it to our users at the right time. Is it on our roadmap? Yes.
Okay, that makes sense, right? Because it is. I've been down this path with user generated content many times, and it gets sticky very quick because you've got compliance. There's the whole, well, what happens? Who has access to this? Different teams have different content that has different security levels. So that makes sense in terms of. So really, right now, what it is, it's this catalog of any of your existing sources of content can then be connected into this and brought in. And the user generated right now, you would use through the typical Teams channels with a fast follow potentially of how do we better integrate user generated content.
Correct. So if you were to generalize this, we are starting with a tenant layer.
Yep.
Tenant catalog accessible to all, as admin has said. They shall have access to this. The second layer is at the team level, which are groups.
Yep.
Over this, there could be a future where you say Christopher only is curating content only for himself, right? So that could be a third level of just the user. But right now, I think these two are the ones where the user need is definitely, we'll start with the tenant one and go to the team one soon.
Okay, got it. And then the other question that was actually asked that I'm curious, and I think I can articulate this one based on what we've talked about now, but right, in terms of any gamification, point-based learning, I know you said this is just the start. So I know a lot of third-party apps that people have now, they have some sort of system in place to do that. Is there also some sort of incentive type thing to the R trainings piece, or is that still kind of housed in whatever tool that's being used today?
So as part of V1, no, we do not have gamification plan as part of V1. As part of our increasing engagement roadmap, we may look at it. To the question that we had was, how will it play across sources? I'll go back to say, most of the engagement is source agnostic. Once we have built the tenant catalog, then anything that you're doing, a liking, viewing, pinning, searching is happening. Your training might be a PDF in your LMS. It could be a LinkedIn Learning object. It could be from Microsoft Learn and Azure or Power Apps, right? We are agnostic to that because our layer of engagement and signals is sitting over it. So if we go down the point system for gamification, for increasing the engagement, it will also sit over in that layer and will go across any sources. And you will not have to worry about that because you're more worried about, hey, my employees, I want to give them gamification across learning. Where does the content come from? It would be ignored to that.
Okay. And I think one of the things that's important that we've highlighted on this that came out when the announcement first came out, I actually heard a lot of conversations around, oh, this is just LinkedIn Learning for Microsoft Teams, but it's not. Right. This is bigger than that. Yes, obviously, LinkedIn Learning is one of the components of it because Microsoft happens to own LinkedIn. So yes, obviously that makes sense. But it's not just LinkedIn Learning for Microsoft Teams. It is whatever those content sources you have that can be hooked up by an administrator on the back end can then be created into kind of your universal catalog of learning opportunities or learning content in your organization.
Absolutely right. So LinkedIn, and of course, it's a special status to say we will provide that through the application, but it is not the only learning content. We will also prepackage Microsoft Learn. As I said, there are a lot of trainings how to create a pivot table. We have trainings around that. We have that in many places. They'll be prepackaged through this, right? And they'll be part of every tenant's catalog till the admin says, no, thou shall not. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
We control them, but other sources, very important.
Well, and I think that's an important delineation for people to think about, right? Because then it's one of those, as we're looking at other solutions, because you still need, right, these other third-party solutions out there. One of the things that we'll be looking at is, how does that then connect into this Teams learning app so that way we can ensure it's part of the larger catalog available to all employees. It's just a different way. Honestly, it's a different way of experiencing what people are doing. And that's why the whole conversation about this was, it's about bringing learning into the actual flow of like where that work is happening.
Correct. Correct. And in content, based on my limited learning is a vast space, but over the past 2 years, I've been immersing myself in this, Christopher. There are, content producers, which we call the tail. How to do nursing better in Australia because the healthcare system is different. Like the larger content providers do not get there,
No.
but for a hospital system in Australia or in some states of Australia, that may be very important. And my system should have the right APIs to be able to say, yes, we can bring that in so that for your users, the system of engagement is still the same, and you go subscribe to that content, and we will have a partnership with the tail providers also to get them in. So that scale system is something that we have to absolutely think about, because if you do not be in the content game itself, you definitely have to be on how do you connect with them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and then one last point I'm going to highlight here, and then I want to jump back to the tool because, right, Viku brought this up, right? And just to clarify for everybody, right, can this pull LMS content into the platform? The answer is absolutely yes. You would hook these content sources up to the app on the administrative side so that then the R training or whatever you want to call it can then search this enterprise catalog of content sources along the way. So it's going to just change the way we structure things moving forward.
And that's very important for us. And we are hopeful that our LMS partners will work with us in making this ecosystem as vibrant, because we will provide a much bigger user base through Teams as well as other M365 user experience properties going into the future for the content in the LMS catalog.
Okay. One of the things that I think is going to be interesting about this, right, is as L&D leaders or learning leaders, it's going to give us a lot more insight, which could be good and also terrifying, into what people actually are using and finding value in terms of our content, right? Because I mean, I've been part of numbers of discussions where it's like, oh, our stuff is so great. The problem is people just don't know it exists. Well, now we're going to find out, right? Now we're going to find out if, are people using this? Is it actually, now it's right in the flow of work. Are people still finding value? Or maybe this is actually going to change, I think, the way we have to think about what content are we designing? What content are we putting in our systems and things like that, so that we actually are creating things that will resonate with our end users.
For sure. It'll not be able to hide now. It'll be there.
It's not hidden behind the excuse of like, wow, well,
Yes.
people they just didn't know. They would love it if they saw it, though. So any other quick things? We've got a couple minutes left. Any other quick things we want to highlight on the experience itself?
Yeah. So if you go to the next slide, a real quick LinkedIn learning content, yes, but the conversations around a learning, very important for all these social things.
Okay.
And being able to just share this. So if you see it here, that card is actually a learning object shared in a conversation. That is where no hiding will become real, right? Because it's so easy for me to find this and share it. And just real quick, Christopher, if you just click through the next 3 slides. So I see it, I want to assign it. I click on the assign, and I go to the next one. Whether individually or with distribution list, I am able to assign it to a few folks who I really need upskilled in a particular training, and I'm able to track this, which is the next screen for us. This hooking up to the LMS systems will provide that layer of, this is the system of engagement, and you can do, for the user, the record lives in one place, while the actual system of record is in LMS, and the two are in sync. So those are, I think, important.
But this goes back to that two-way communication part, where that information is being communicated back, but it's also being communicated forward so that you can find all this data in Teams itself.
Absolutely. And then not stopping only at web desktop, but also going on mobile. Super important for us. 2 clicks away to quickly show that experience to users.
Got it.
That's the personal app, and that's the mobile experience. So wrapping those social features, micro learning features, and even personal learning, and getting in the flow of work, and getting the signals in M365, which makes it more natural to surface this, is what the journey we are on.
Okay. And I think real quick, the thing I'm seeing here, right? You look at the mobile experience, and the point is, this goes back to this whole concept of this is like your one approved catalog of like, here's all the possible resources, so that when you're looking for this stuff, instead of having to say, oh, I need to remember to go look in the LMS or look over in SharePoint or pull this together, there's the one catalog that's already where everybody is, that people can pull all this stuff together.
Yep. And we've made the investment in the mobile experience so that all of that accrues to the workflow for learning.
Okay, got it. Well, I think Ben said this. Yes, we are just scratching the surface. We definitely did not get into all of it. And again, this is just the starting line for where Microsoft Teams is going from a features and functionality for learning in the flow of work. So yes, I think there's much more. And for those of you who may not know, there's a Global HR Summit coming up in September. We plan on continuing this dialogue, continuing the conversation about this. Vineet, I'm sure we will talk plenty more as Microsoft continues to evolve with what it's doing. But this has been phenomenal. I appreciate you being here. For everybody who's been watching, hopefully this gave you better insight into what Microsoft Teams, the learning app, is, how it works, kind of the bigger technical side behind it, but also what it means for the end user experience. So Vineet, I appreciate the time. This has been awesome. And thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you, Christopher. This was super fun, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Bye-bye, everybody.